My name is Bhargavi Davar, and I'm speaking to you from Pune city. Pune is a smaller city on the west of India near Mumbai. I'm really honored to be part of this program on community-based mental health innovations. And I thank Dr. Jaswant, Guzdar, Nicole, and others at the McGill University for inviting me into this program. Really happy to be here with all of you. And the program itself looks amazing. And I hope that you've had some wonderful sessions through the days. My presentation today is in 3 parts. And I hope so that we will have a chance to meet you and have some discussions as well after the session. Well, the first part is a personal narrative. The second part is a little bit of timeline on how we came to do what we are doing today at the Bapu Trust. What are the historical elements that influenced us? We always took a offbeat path in mental health care. That links partly to the life experiences I and some of us at the Bapu Trust had. And it also has to do with our exposure to the broader culture. We had always had very strong engagement with the cultural spaces that we occupy. So that's the second element. And the third element is the actual program itself, and what makes it unique for us, what makes it appropriate for the communities that we work with. How does it link up with the lived experiences of people who actually develop these programs? So that's in 3 segments. This first segment, I would like to start with a little bit of my personal narrative. It's always difficult for me, even at my age, to talk about it. So I'm going to read from what I have, and if possible, then also to show a slide of the kind of images that really I'm ghosted by them even now. So many images. I got a few into that slide. Largely images of incarceration. For 5 decades and more after being born, I was still not sure whether what I was witness to as a child of 5 or 6 was true, or whether they were delusions. My brother was younger than me. He was probably 3.5, 4 years old. Limited exposure to those places, but we share a lot of memories in common. They said schizophrenia runs in families. I dared not share what I had seen, lest I too end up there. It was only just 2 years ago, because of a kind journalist who is chronicling the story of the Bapu Trust, that my brother and I actually sat down and shared those memories and found that there was a very high level of congruence. What he remembered and what I remembered were nearly the same. We argued whether she had insulin coma or not. I felt that she did because she had mentioned it to me, and he felt that no, she had not received insulin coma. But really, the bulk of the memories we shared were very much the same. He had some very strong memories as well. So in my family, growing up in the south of India, we never talked about these things. There was a big silence about being mental and going there. My mother was intensely religious. She was in bhakti. She could fluently recite spiritual poems and songs about her personal god Krishna. She spent many hours in devotion and prayer. Members of my large joint family started to call her mental, and soon began a long journey of antipsychotic pills, direct shock treatments, insulin coma, straitjackets, shackling, solitary confinement, mental institutions. She was often, found nearby railway tracks, inside trains, hiding, pulled out, bundled up, and brought home by well-intentioned policemen or some kind neighbors or cousins. We never openly talked about any of this, just that she seemed to disappear from her home as soon as she appeared. and so on and so forth. So life with mom was a series of appearances and disappearances. The system and my family must have considered me too young to be separated from my mother. So I was escorted to visit her in these places quite often. This was the 1960s, just after the Indian independence. They reformed the prisons because of the political experience of being inside of prisons during the freedom movement. They didn't do much about asylums. And so the asylums retained the stale dungeon-like quality of the institutions of colonial India. In many ways, the asylums of today, 70 years later in modern India, look and smell the same. So it was a good 10 years of my life exposure to these places. Private institutions were a bit more fancy, but equally cruel and inhuman. There were a tormenting resurgence of flashback memories through my 20s and the 30s of watching her just after her direct shock treatment, dull and placid, tied down to her bed, spread eagled, shackled by chains to the iron grill of her small bare room. Policemen carrying her into our home at all hours of the night or morning, bundled up in soft cloth, tied down, curled up like an infant. Her anguished pain, bewilderment, wailing tears as her prayer room was locked, her gods and goddesses given away, her poetry books destroyed, prayer books destroyed. And in my mind also generated several other imaginary scenarios. Where did she live when she ran away from the house? Did she live on the streets as a homeless lunatic? Was she lined up against the walls of the Guruvayur temple where she went very often with the other homeless begging folks? Did she beg for food? Where did she rest? Where did she eat? Who gave her food? These were torments. Tied down. I heard and saw a lot of that during my childhood years, inside the asylums and outside too. When I first read about the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that is the CRPD, and the right to integrity, that included bodily and mental integrity, that's Article 17 of the CRPD. I even today get emotionally moved by this. I know what that meant to people who inexorably and eventually get tied down, pulled into places for further physical and chemical restraint. Of course, the process of tying down is not so gross anymore, but the outcomes are the same. For me, against a person's will and preference or involuntary commitment is very visceral and very traumatic. After 5 decades, that hasn't changed for me. When a trauma memory is triggered, there are places on my skin, my nose, my eyes, my ears, my body that flare up with the trauma. I want to pull my ears out, scratch my skin, burn it. It's very, very strong even today. In my younger days, I used to faint. I fainted quite often, though the doctors could not say why. As I grew older, and even now, it is an intangible and dirty second skin. Flashes of images, smells of the hospitals, of the confinement that I cannot discard or ignore or forget. It has been an enduring, depressing trauma for more than 5 decades, settled as a cloak on my body. Just about 6 years or so ago, I was visiting the Philippines to meet some peers from the disability movement. They invited me to visit the only asylum in their country, a large panopticon asylum structure in Manila. It was a long drive and it was my first visit to the country. I didn't know the terrain at all. Yet at some point during the drive, I asked my friends if we were getting close because I could smell the place. The cognitive parts of my early experiences, the rationality and irrationality of such institutions, why family members behaved in inhuman ways, the serious depression, suicidal thoughts and attempts. All those got resolved with a variety of actions: studying, research, writing, joining political movements, rigorous fitness schedules, so on and so forth. However, the body remained scarred. The body never forgot. I continue to identify as a survivor of childhood trauma, relating strongly to enduring exposure to mental health care. How strong the history of trauma and the reactions of my body to have spent many decades just thinking about this question: why is the mental health system about custody and not about care? Why is the mental health system about withdrawing justice and depriving people of liberty rather than bringing them more resources, more emotional resources, more social capital, more nutritional benefits, more fitness benefits? So why have we structured our policy systems in this way? Why do we have laws which allow people like me to get so traumatized? People who put my mom in the asylum were not bad people, they were following the law. Why do we have such laws? So I continue with those questions, and today I think there are thousands, if not many tens and hundreds of thousands of people who come to platform like this to ask these questions more frontally and find new solutions. My life will go on with these experiences. I'm not expecting the trauma. I do a lot with my body to reduce the bulk of those experiences, but I still struggle with my body eruptions every now and then. The second part of my presentation is really a little bit about the thought process for change. We were thinking about innovations a long time, of course, and particularly once we started the Bapu Trust, we were thinking about what kind of world we wanted that will really be as close to our lived experiences as possible. Bapu Trust has always had a lot of people who have lived experiences of trauma, of different mental health issues, people with enduring psychosocial disabilities. And we were probably the first organization which were building on lived experiences of persons with psychosocial disabilities in the Asia Pacific region. Recently, I found one in Fiji Islands, which is about 16 years old. There are organizations in Hong Kong which are building support systems based on lived experiences and learnings from there. These days, many of you will know that we are considered as quite capable, of course, of starting our own services. Many of us come into, into service provider role in the way that we define it. So there's a lot happening out there. You can do a lot with lived experiences of mental health issues, and Bapu Trust is clearly an outcome of those experiences. We've been a service provider for about 20 years. We completed 20 years in 2019. I think that's where we are at. And so we really, of course, challenge the expert, client model of care, particularly given the kind of colonial frameworks that the mental health system in particular has derived. We believe that more egalitarian system needs to be conceived of or constructed again. So there are several developments which happened between 2005, 2006, right up to 2008, 9, 10, which helped us to think of this alternative world. And I'm going to screen share now, starting with a poem that that my mother wrote. So it says, "Give me a place. I have had enough. Can I get a place at your feet?" And so of course, she's talking to Lord Krishna. "If not, an inauspicious death is better. With an unwavering heart, a mind that is not filled with obscenity, give me a place near you, or give me poison. It is better to die than to live as a wandering lunatic. Please give me a place where I can be near you daily. If there is no haven for me, my mind will not be clear. The hurt that I feel in my heart will not heal. Please give it to me soon, this ignorant being who has lost herself in you. Give me a place." And of course, this poem came to me just very recently when I was preparing to present something on my life story and my mother's life story in a public event of the Bapu Trust. But I felt it had a lot to resonate with the kind of vision that we created over the years, for the Bapu Trust. So inclusion is for everybody and about everybody. This is the vision of the Bapu Trust. We dream of healing environments where every person uses their own capacity to make choices, heal themselves, recover, and move on. Recovery methods will be creative, non-violent, non-hazardous, and playful. And this is a very old vision, actually. It's been with us for about 15 years. And we are looking at transforming communities and families and not just targeting individuals for treatment. And we have this very ambitious aspiration of building emotionally resilient communities, which will not just give something to people with psychosocial disabilities or give something to people with, with mental health issues, but it will be a community where everyone can offer support to each other and care. So there is the idea embedded in there that any transaction which is one directional, one hand giving and one hand receiving, is always, a situation of power and social imbalance. And it needs to be, this. And so that's the vision with which we kind of created the Bapu Trust Sahara program. And it had its own checkered history, I would say, because when we started it, we started it with all good intention as yet another. These are some pictures of our communities. We work in low-income communities of Pune. We work in right now. We have like a really vast population coverage. I would say this is one of the largest community-based support programs in all of Asia Pacific, if not in the global south. It's like really vast. Our coverage is about 29 low-income communities of Pune. We call them human settlements or bastis. And yeah, we work a lot with women, with persons with disabilities, with young people, young adults, and all of that. And as these pictures show, even in the vision statement, we use a lot of creative methods. And I will come to that in a moment. And it took us all of 15 years to arrive at a design which is somewhat satisfactory for us. There were three major developments between 2005 and 2000, I would say 8, 9, which helped us really to arrive at the present design of the Bapu Trust services. The services itself has been called Sahara for about ever since we began it. But it changed many formats. It developed several additional elements as we went along. We kept tweaking the design. We had several small research projects, that interns did. For example, from the University of Edinburgh, we had some interns. From Tata Institute, we had interns. We had interns from a lot of places who focused on small research pieces, gave us feedback. We had evaluators. We had our own internal assessment process. So we had what is called learning cycles before we kind of tweaked the design. Unfortunately, a lot of that was not published at the time. Just our interest was that, are we anywhere close to our vision? Are we equalizing care relationships? Are we creating support systems? Are we reclaiming communities for what they are meant to be, that is, support systems for not just people with disabilities, but for the world at large, for their communities, for their neighborhoods? Um, are the neighbors closely knit? Can you kind of depend on them to offer support rather than engage in a stigmatizing way? So all of those questions kind of came up for us along the way. Are we happy with just people recovering from their symptoms? Do we want to look at something more than just recovery? So all those questions came to us. And I think these questions kept coming to us as we went deeper and deeper into the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We were engaged with the convention right from 2005 when it was in the drafting stage, and kept it up, and we continue to dip into it, do our learnings, our trainings, all of that. It was a big decolonizing instrument for our program. Earlier, we had a traditional mental health program. The vision was this, but we were providing mental health services towards treatment of people with mental health issues. We had a clinic set up. Some professionals were running this setup. It didn't work. In 1 year, we had just 40 clients, and most of them dropped out. It was not satisfying. We had no engagement with communities. We didn't know who our communities were. Who are these people? Why are we talking to them about their lives when we know absolutely nothing about how they live? Are they talking to each other saying that I have schizophrenia, I'm hearing voices, I have depression? Are they talking to each other like this? So these are the questions that came up at the end of that period. Actually, we shut down that part of the program and we started afresh in 2008. By then, we also had very good exposure to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And we went back and talked to people. We talked to people about their feelings, how do they talk about emotional distress? We talked a lot about how do they feel thras. Thras is how they express themselves, and largely it's a very common word in our communities that people say that thras hoto, we have thras. And so we unbundled words like that: tension, thras, chinta, bad, dar, all of that. We unbundled many of those concepts. We did a census to find out the community structuration of where we were working. Are they and no surprise, we did not find any upper caste people in our communities. Mostly they were minority groups or people from the Dalit neo-Buddhist communities. No surprise there. Not many from the open caste communities or the upper caste communities, so to speak. So yeah, we understood the lives of people by doing lots and lots of baseline research, doing some ethnographies, all of that. And so by the time we got back to an idea that we really need to look at design, and we should not do community mental health in the traditional way, even though we never really did believe in psychiatric medication, but the traditional design came with those, Western colonial assumptions that up to this point, a psychologist or a psychiatric social worker can support, but after that, you make a referral to a psychiatrist. So that assumption was not changed in that design. Also talk therapy. I mean, talk therapy is a very elite. That's how it is taught us, that it is very elite and you can't do talk therapy because, primitive communities do not so and so. And I think this audience knows very much all those assumptions. It was not that communities do not talk. It is that they use a different language, and that is body speak. And we were ignorant We were not aware that there is this whole discourse about body speak that we needed to, get to in order to have a design which was culturally appropriate, which actually served the purpose for which it was made, and all of that. So trauma trainings, exposure to the new biology. At that time, Bessel van der Kolk visited us in Pune. We had a wonderful workshop with him. We were exposed to the work of, Peter Levine, all of that. Trauma work, mindfulness was picking up in a big way in Pune city. We had enlightened teachers coming to teach us here in Pune city. This was 2005, 2008. The arts-based therapy course was started by the World Center for Creative Learning Foundation. It was a total sensory blast to be exposed to some of these new ways of looking at trauma and healing from trauma. And we realized that, these are not, these have just been obscured. These forms of knowledge and practice have just been obscured from the typical clinical psychology textbook and the typical psychiatry textbook. They never entered the mental health field in the way that they should have. These have also very long and credible histories in the world of knowledge and practice. Of course, there was also the assumption that the West gives to the East, and the East really has nothing of its own when we have traditions which are at least 2,500 years old, with 80,000 practices. The Indian mind traditions, Buddhism, for example, offers 80,000 mind training techniques, and what can compare with that? It's a 2,500-year-old tradition. And so there is all of that. So we got exposed to some of these things while we went around cross-checking, that, okay, we have this wonderful new thing about the body and the body speaking and all of that, but how does it match with the lived experiences of people, and the match was wonderful. I mean, it was like really a lot of congruence between what we were learning from these traditions and what we were hearing from our communities. It was our fortune that we got a really great project from the Dutch Indo-Dutch partnership on development, and we conducted 3 years of research on traditional healing and indigenous practices. And here I have to, I'm compelled to show you some of these photographs. We did an exhibition, and the exhibition had amazing cultural expressions of distress and healing. For me, it's so difficult to think of something as distress and something else which somebody else needs to do as healing. This is for me it's a binary that I think that the Cartesian dichotomy and all the traditions that have come out of that, including, of course, Western psychology, So we did this exhibition. Of course, we almost got pelted by the modernists and the rationalists. It was a public exhibition. This one is a beautiful healing tradition in Maharashtra. And of course, the very visible connection with nature, with dance, with movement, and if you go closer to this particular caravan, then there is like incense, and there is bells, and there is dole, the drums, and these are men. And so cultural expression, creative expression, we learned from this. I mean, wherever we went, we saw some amazing drummers, folk drummers, and they were using it for seances and for healing sessions. Many of them were seasoned counselors, and they were not using talk therapy. They were using art forms, all of that. So we saw many of these, and at the same time, we did a lot of this. Just an example of some of the words that people used in our communities to express themselves. It doesn't read, of course, like a diagnostic, like a diagnostic set of categories. So they were expressing themselves as like, body feels like rubber, the waist jerks, the veins in the thumb hurt, there is a snake curled inside, there are burning sensations, the body is tight, hands are numb, hot fumes are coming out from the body. There is a tapping on the head. I feel heavy from the spine to my leg joint. I'm feeling pulled, my hair is pulled. There are knots in my lower back, there are knots in my neck, there are knots in my chest. Body feels loose, there's a lot of itching. The veins are bursting from inside. There is fire in my stomach, there is fire in my head region. The legs are tickled, there is no blood in vein, and so on and so forth. And there was a huge metaphor of pain that we heard in these expressions, and we gathered quite a lot of them, and so coming back to the imprint on our design, there were these major three trends. One was the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which really talked about if people don't have food, housing, employment, social protection, security, freedom to choose, freedom to determine their own lives in the way that they want, access to sporting, culture, leisure. There are over 30 rights in the convention. And if these are not available to a person, then their experience of their impairment, so to speak, is aggravated to a great extent, and that whole, the impairment and the enormous social barriers which restricts their participation, that constitutes the disability. And again, it's a very Cartesian binary, that you have the impairment, you correct that, and people will already be included. No, you have to address the whole ecosystem, the impairment as well as the ecosystem which aggravates the experience of exclusion and marginalization. Then the bodies speak. It came to us in different ways through the arts-based therapy training. These days we run a full year course on arts-based therapy. And the research on traditional healing and indigenous practices, where every center, we visited over 21 centers, and every center had creative expression at the very core of devotion. And for us, that part was healing. So after that, we started to say that, there is a brain has a God center, and you need to stimulate it now and again. Otherwise, you don't feel full and satisfied. Then we had exposure and extensive documentation of community and cultural idioms of distress. So I would say that these three elements that we were exposed to as part of our own learning helped us to really create the community mental health program. From a point of view of, number one, broad gestures of working with populations, neighborhoods, and communities, and then households and individuals. So we didn't just directly land at the individual and start work with them, but it was really at the population, the neighborhood, the community, the stakeholders in the community, and then inching closer towards the smallest social unit, that is the family, and then the person. So we arrived at that. The second one was that you really had to have body speak, as the overall universe of discourse, particularly if you're working in low middle income countries, and if you're looking at at culturally sensitive ways of engaging, communicating, supporting people with mental health issues and psychosocial disabilities. And of course, the third one is to have a really wide range of strategies to reach out and support people. And I think that will be the third segment that I will bring to you today. So in this segment, I will talk about the Community Mental Health and Inclusion Program, which is called Sahara. It is based on the idea that, it's drawn from a number of spiritual resources, which I dare say are connected with lived experiences of people. For example, there is the Ubuntu concept in Buddhism, the concept of interconnectedness is very strong, so on and so forth. So for Sahar, we started out with this metaphor. It was kind of a guiding metaphor for us, that we create emotionally sustainable and inclusive communities. Um, Human beings are a natural support and resource of love, hope, sharing, and other positive strengths with each other. I mean, this is the essence of our humanity, and this is our essential human nature. And with increasing modernization, all of that blah, we have forgotten that essential nature. So we think of emotions as a flow among people, like water or wind. It is a natural resource which can be harnessed, which can be conserved, which can be pooled, and which can be shared. It is an entrepreneurship metaphor. Along the years, we realized that care and support is, even though it's essential to human nature, it's not something that people recall or remember on daily basis. And such recall and remembrance on daily basis is really important for us to preserve our humanity and be of help to each other, to be of help to ourselves, all of that, to overcome all the harsh memories that we carry, that our bodies carry, all of that. And this sense of Ubuntu or interconnectedness is not just for us, our immediate family members, our dear friends, spouse, parent, grandparent, so on and so forth, but it is a more universal kind of feeling for all of humanity and for all of the planet, including all living and non-living things. So we started to see communities as a resource, as a resources. As far as resources go, then it's like a community well. You can dip into it, you can share it, you can replenish it, you can preserve it, you can conserve it, and so on and so forth. And so psychosocial ecosystem, we started talking about creating psychosocial ecosystems. And this is a kind of, I love this diagram that one of our trainers, Alexander Cote, made for us. And it shows you two two possible worlds. One is a possible world which is actually very real for a lot of persons with psychosocial disabilities. It is one where the person is isolated. They are brought within a healthcare system which increases the stigma, which cuts people off from their communities, de-skills them, and leaves them quite, in vegetative states and quite defenseless, and never owning any part of their lives. So on this side, you see the mental health system in its traditional forms. Then you see that these two are bridges, CRPD, which I talked about early on. And CRPD helps to convert this colonial way of looking at mental health into this inclusive way of looking at persons with psychosocial disabilities. Here too, you have mental health over here, but it's only one bubble among a variety of bubbles. So you have arts, culture, sports, political public life, education, family life, social protection, jobs, support services, having social networks, decent work, housing, participation in financial transactions, making decisions of one's own, and so on. And this bubble is endless. I think people can fill it out in the way that they would like to live their lives. And this is for us the way of decolonizing our our discourse as it exists today. And I think all of us are trying to find ways to move from here, to move towards here. But there's something about this, and I call it, in fact, I call it the post-colonial trauma of policy making, that we don't seem to give up on this. We go this far and then we come back and get stuck over here. And for us in Bapu Trust, we've even stopped calling ourselves a mental health, program. We call ourselves the inclusive mental health, inclusion program. So we are more and more working from within the perspective of disability inclusion. When you say, okay, what is how in how many ways can you treat a person with a mental illness, it already goes into a kind of expert driven system. And but when you talk about, okay, in how many ways can you make inclusion possible for a person with a disability, many doors open, many doors open. And therefore we try to, in the very speech about ourselves and about what we need, we try to speak from a disability inclusion perspective, and not from a mental illness perspective. I think this has opened up another alternative reality to us, another possible world to occupy, where we can just step out and enjoy freedoms, look for jobs, complete education, aspire for having partners, aspire for marriage, aspire for having our own bank account, stuff like that. So you live life as on equal basis with everybody else. And so this has been a very important, what they call a paradigm shift for us. And another basic strategy for developing inclusive community mental health program is committing to keeping the voices of persons with disabilities at the very center of knowledge, practice, and program planning and decision making. We commit to zero coercion, that we will continuously ask the person whom we are supporting what they need and not assume what they need, and offer stuff which they definitely don't need, like, for example, involuntary treatment, involuntary medication, all of that. I think we don't hear enough about program designs in community mental health. It would be good to make this a whole research paradigm. What is a program design that would actually result in inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities? Article 19 of the CRPD, our programs, mostly Bapu Trust, TCI, wherever we are active, we tend to focus on Article 19, that is the right to living independently in communities and inclusion. From that point of view, from Article 19 point of view, I think today, for example, in India, we have a couple of laws which embody the right to living in the community. However, the design question is not asked. When you ask the design question, you also ask the tool question. What are the tools that are going to help us move from point A to point B? The old tools, will they serve us? I mean, if we're continuing to use the GHP, GHQ, the BPRS, all the diagnostics tools that we have been using, will they continue to be of useful use to us? I doubt it very much. I mean, we have to generate our own tools, and we have developed, things like body maps, circle of care tool, family assessment tool, nutrition assessment tool. We have the community inclusion tool, so on and so forth. And some of them have been validated, not all of them. But we had to generate our own kind of tools in order to make our practice real in the communities. So I would definitely urge investment on questions about program design. When it comes to trauma-informed services, we definitely think that there are 4 broad elements which are generic to such programs. One is peer support, particularly group support, a system and allocation of staff time for dialogue and negotiation with families, communities, and neighborhoods. This is a bulk of our work. To have a crisis response and support team, not in the way that people usually deliver crisis support in traditional mental health care, ACT teams, outreach teams which enforce treatment, not like this. For us, crisis is defined as high restriction of participation, situations of violence in the community. So this is how we define crisis. It is a crisis of the ecosystem. It's not crisis in an individual. And so then the support measures would address the environment which creates this kind of crisis of violence, abuse, neglect, stoppage of food and fluids, driving somebody to suicide, pushing someone out of the house to be wandering on the streets, So there's something in the ecosystem which has several outcomes for different kinds of people within that system. One of them happens to be an individual who is wandering, So this is how we think about crisis, and crisis response is at different levels. One is at the different levels of creating support systems in the neighborhood, support systems within the family, negotiating with the family to ensure that such violence does not happen, ensuring basic needs, food, fluids, clothes, all of that, place to sleep, place to rest, freedom to move about as people like to walk away from such a traumatic environment, toxic environment. So the freedom to walk away and to be able to empathize with that response, and so on and so forth. So this is how we imagine crisis response and support to be like more wholesome and trauma informed. Linkages with various development schemes and programs, both government and non-government, community mobilization, and building back better. So we expect that when such a design is delivered, the outcome will be the inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities, and such people will be able to live independently, not all by themselves, but independently in an interconnected way, and be included in lives of communities, contributing as positive members. So yeah, just to summarize that, we're talking about multiplying community emotional resources through the development of psychosocial self-care, support and caregiving groups and networks, both formal and non-formal. The second major strategy for such a program would be partnerships for inclusion with the local government, non-state organized actors, informal community actors towards inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities. Here I want to mention that including religious leaders, the local imam, people like that, the local policemen, people have come in, stepped in to support the people who we are supporting through our programs, where there are crisis needs and it need to be met in a more collective community justice orientated way. The third strategy is, of course, the provision of specific trauma-informed mental health and well-being services to address a spectrum of needs. And we use psychosocial arts-based and community development modalities largely. We do offer comprehensive healthcare because in our communities, we are more likely to see vitamin deficiencies, malnutrition, anemia, all of that. And of course, a lot of infections. For example, TB is still a big thing in our communities. HIV is a big thing. We're likely to see some of these issues, and so we offer comprehensive health care. We do believe that it's the failure of the public health system which results in the so-called alarming rise of mental disorders. And if the public health system does its job, then the bulk of health issues will also settle, mental health issues. Then, of course, there are the continuous application of project management principles to research, monitor outcomes, and to advocate for policy change. So at the back end of the program, there is a huge machinery generating data, studying the data, and feeding back into the program. Healing and overcoming psychosocial trauma in low-income settings might require three kinds of preparation. One is the community preparation, and there is the programs preparation, and there is the systems preparation. In community preparation, there are a whole range of things to do. One is baseline research, intensive community engagement to understand the whole mental health spectrum in communities. What is the community like? Who are the people at risk? How do they express themselves? What does their body speak? What are their cognitive experiences, cultural experiences, and do they really ask for mental health services? What do they need? Exhaustive communication strategies. I think for the Sahara program, about 40 to 50% of the work is communication strategies at multiple levels, at the level of small household level units, like 6 to 7 households. Then there is the broader set of strategies of using marketplaces, school campuses, college campuses, Anganwadi system, all of that. That's the larger stakeholder group. And then there are much larger spaces that the communication strategies targets. For example, during festival times, we have masses of people. So there are like population strategies that are also used using street plays, theater work, all of that, slogan marches. So there's a wide range of exhaustive communication strategies. So we reach out to people at the population level on a variety of topics, including distress, trauma, wellness, and basically conveying the message that everyone is an agent in making up the psychosocial ecosystem. We all sometimes do need to ask for support, and we need to mobilize support for oneself. So it's not just one person who needs support, but as a community, as vulnerable groups, as people who are marginalized within the larger city space at large, all of us need support. And so let's just depend on each other. So there are exhaustive communication strategies with multiple stakeholders, including in hospital settings and college settings, so on and so forth. We do extensive trainings on self-care and other support mechanisms. And for example, giving an example, treating oneself as a very important guest. I think the team has about 100 self-care modalities, small techniques. Nothing compares with the 80,000 techniques of the Buddha, but we have a few. We have about 100. Many of them are based on meditation practices, visualizations, moving the body, the daily pursuit of happiness, calming by a variety of breath practices, mindfulness, all of that, and also many body practices to improve general health. For example, the importance of exercise, the importance of eating nourishing food, all of that. So, and it does have an impact. I mean, not only do we deliver a nutrition module, we also go and follow up on the nutrition module. Are people actually consuming what we are advising them to? Has their diet changed over the time that they engage with our program? So stuff like this. And so this is on a continuing basis. Preparing neighborhoods for support and care of vulnerable people. So sometimes families give up and then we mobilize neighbors, and it's called a neighborhood alert. Here, the exhaustive communication strategies steps in a big way. So wherever there is somebody who is neglected or who's in crisis in the way we define it, then there is this net created using communication, negotiation, sometimes confrontation with families, pushing the moral button. It's a very important strategy for our team. Like, you can't do this to another human being, and many times it works. So preparing neighborhoods, partnerships for inclusion in communities. Today there are a wide number of altruists, self-appointed social workers, the local government officers, the Anganwadi. A variety of government services are available today in a way that they were not before. Then religious institutions, the school systems. So we mobilize everyone into the cause of inclusion. And for us, that's what inclusion is about. It's not something that one organization does by itself. So at any time, the Sahara program would have about 100, 120 partnerships for inclusion. And so that is about preparing communities. Program preparation, despite the larger population-based strategies we adopt, the program itself is modular. There is a modular or matrix-like design, and it's called the 8-point framework of service delivery. In that, there are these elements. Self-care is at number 1. Number 2 is nutrition, and number 3 is comprehensive. I don't think number 3 is comprehensive healthcare. It comes much later. Building close relationships within the social, strengthening the social unit, however people may want to see that. Social capital building, focusing on livelihoods, inclusion in development, addressing social justice issues, individual and group support. So this broadly, it's a matrix. So you have the mental health spectrum and you have a matrix of interventions. So this is matched against this, and then people go and deliver these. So who are the people who deliver these? We have a lot of non-formal support people. We hire them from the communities where we are working. And we have a few formal support people. They could be counselors, development practitioners, clinical psychologists, arts-based therapists, people. A lot of us are people with lived experience. So that's a lot of us too. And so, yeah, so at the moment, I think so. We see about 500 people in a year across 5 centers. We also have many satellite programs, and mostly on awareness, on deinstitutionalization, things like that. So we do have some satellite programs, um, and uh, and the bulk of our staff or people from the communities, and sometimes that creates dilemmas because we know as experts, as people with lived experience, this is what must happen, but there is community resistance to apply what we think we know, and so there is a lot of dialogue, and so I believe the system is still flexible for this double loop of communication, dialogue, and adjusting the program to what the community actually needs. And so there is that. Yeah, these are the more monitoring kind of work that we do in the Bapu Trust. Taking these, for us, this is a very important pilot. It's reached a certain level of maturation and scaling. We are already in the process of training other organizations on this model of support. This is probably, as I mentioned in the beginning, is probably one of the largest peer support programs for inclusion of persons with psychosocial mental health issues and psychosocial disabilities. And I do not want to give the impression that we are giving support, but for medical care you go somewhere else. I think if this is available to people, a lot of mental health issues already subside. A lot of trauma issues already are addressed. People learn ways to care for themselves and for each other. And I think that's achieving a lot that needs to be done in any case. And so I'd like to stop here. Thank you for the audience. And I would like to take questions. Thank you so much.